I'm just going to invite the next presenter, Miss Lenny Longwe. So he's a keynote speaker. So Lenny Longwe is an educationalist spanning a period of over 20 years with special passion for advancing the cause of quality and relevance of curriculum, entrepreneurship, and industry needs. Before her current full-time job as a senior education standard officer, she was a head of department in charge of business studies as well as a tutor. Ms. Longwe is a specialist in qualification evaluation under Zambia Qualifications Authority. So I welcome Ms. Lenny Longwe for present the topic, embracing gender in a diversified economy.
Thank you so much. My name is Lenny Longwe from Zambia. I work for the Ministry of General Education under the Department of Curriculum and Evaluation. My role basically is to ensure the implementation of policy and education delivery in ensuring that quality is maintained. In this afternoon presentation, I look at gender in a diversified economy. So I'm looking at embracing gender in a diversified economy. As an educator, my presentation this afternoon will have a bias toward many policies and strategies that have been worked on and researched on in line with education. And maybe just to mention, it would be important to note that coming from the research that has been conducted around Zambia, when I refer to gender or the vulnerable gender, so much of it will lean on the women and girls because they have been the most vulnerable gender. Allow me at this point to just quickly go through the main terms of my presentation, which is the main terms which are gender, economy, and diversity. So to begin with, I look at gender. So gender is defined as a state of being male or female. Okay, so in line with gender, it would be contextual or culturally to assign a few gender roles which may not apply from one given context to another. In talking about that, reference is made to sex roles that will be fixed and more permanent and the same regardless the context. Further, I look at a few examples that will consolidate on gender and gender roles. So basically, I look at the following, which are cooking, which is normally stereotyped to be a role for women, gardening, which stereotyped as a role for the male gender, and caretaking, which is also generally assumed to be a role for the women. Sensitivity seems to bring in men, on the other hand, that they are not as sensitive. Of course, that is a stereotype because it may not apply from one given context to another. Dressing generally there implies that, according to my research here, women are associated to skirts while men are associated to trousers. In defining the next term, I look at diversity. Note that this is in order to give an understanding of what I am going to present this afternoon. So diversity there is defined according to the Queensborough Community College 2018. So diversity manifests itself characteristic of race, language, culture, religion, and socioeconomic status. This is not exhaustive of what might be deemed as diversity. And I think before I move on to defining economy, under diversity, I would want to also appreciate this conference, which has put human resource from across the globe. So this is an example of a conference that has embraced diversity. I move on to define the third and final term in my presentation, which is economy. So I define economy as a place where production, distribution, and trade, and when I talk about trade in this case, I make reference to the selling and buying as they are conducted. So an economy is also characteristic of consumption of goods and services. I put examples there of types of economies, which may be argued by various scholars, but for the sake of my presentation, I present to you the three types of economies. The first one being the free market economy, which is also characteristic of all the economic players being actively involved in the running of an economy. And it's also an economy that is also significant of individuals and businesses making their own economic decisions. The second type of economy there is the command economy, where government controls basically all the economic factors, meaning that the central government makes all economic decisions. The third type of economy is a mixed economy, which embraces the type 1 and type 2 type of economy. I move on to just give an insight into protocols that have been signed by Zambia that promote gender. So in 1997, Zambia was signatory to the SADC Declaration on Gender Development. So the background is that having looked at the oppression and the so many imbalances on gender, the Southern African Development Community saw it fit to actually make signatory states to this rights protocol, which is gender in development. In 2015, Zambia is also signatory to the Sustainable Development Goals. And in this presentation, specific is to goal number 5, which promotes gender equality. I must mention that in the Millennium Development Goals, which were projected to end by 2015, Zambia was also signatory to this charter, which promoted gender equality and empowerment for women. This is specifically goal number 3. Okay, to zero into the Zambian context, this is a demonstration of how Zambia takes cognizance of the many protocols that it is signatory to. In 2012, a specific ministry was introduced that basically looked at the issues in gender development. This ministry in the consequent government has been combined with other ministries, but the essence has been to have specific manpower look at ensuring that gender issues are upheld. In 2014, coming from the education sector, it was enlightening to also see our country sign the national gender policy. Further on in 2015, Zambia signed and enacted the Act on Gender Equity and Equality. That's also not forgetting the 1997 re-entry policy. Now, the re-entry policy, I must explain the detail of it. The re-entry policy in the Ministry of Education was also resultant of the fact that there was so much oppression on the girls and the females. especially that Zambia is a developing country. So that policy allows for a girl child that falls pregnant to retain their school place at the same school or any other school of their choice while they can, as they are pregnant or after delivery. So in looking at gender, it can be seen from this slide presentation that Zambia is cognizant of the fact that gender cannot be left behind in a diversified economy in order for development to take place. So gender in the Zambian context, as I look at it from the case of the Gender Mainstreaming Auditors Report of 2012, it is clear of policies and strategies which aimed to look at equity and equality. On this one, the emphasis was on women in decision making. Okay, the history here is that somewhere around 2004, 2005, there was need to raise the percentage of women in decision making, especially parliamentary positions and ministerial positions and appointments. So there was need to raise the percentage to somewhere 30%. Yes, I said 30%. It may look small, but in a developing country where probably the percentages were even lower than that, that 30% projected a lot of stride in improving and embracing the vulnerable gender. So in the auditor's report of 2012, again, they look at the gender imbalance in Zambia. So in looking at that, there were a few strategies that were put in place, which included equal admission rates in schools ranging from the early childhood education into primary schools, secondary schools, and tertiary education. So for secondary schools, there was need to actually build more schools to embrace girls. So it meant that a lot of girls' secondary schools were to be built. And in the entry for tertiary education, learning that we are coming from very few universities in the country, there was also a policy to allow for the female gender to be allowed entry criteria of points which were more weaker than those for the male gender. Also, in regards to the same report, there was loan and credit facility which was to be given to the women in order to reduce poverty levels. I must also mention that in looking at all this, as I earlier said, my interest and focus is in embracing gender as an educationalist, knowing that only when we become equal partners can we attain the actual economic development. So going forward on that one, of course, this list is not exhaustive. There was also land ownership empowerment in line with international treaties. This was basically for women to improve their economic levels, especially for women-headed households. Okay, so I move on further to look at the benefits of gender now in a diversified economy. Okay, in looking at that, bringing it down to this presentation, the first in that list is enhanced economic activity. So when an economy has allocated its resources fairly and equally, there is a stimulated economic activity in various sectors of the economy. This is practical in the Zambian scenario. When you look at the point where there is increased tax base, in the 2016-2020 annual report, we noticed that due to an enhanced economy where various economic players are brought on board, there was a lot of consideration for the informal sector. This embraced the small, medium, and large enterprise, which resulted into a larger tax base, moving revenues from 2016 from somewhere around 29,000 in 2016 to somewhere around 50,000 plus in 2020. Of course, this went side by side with GDP increase. In looking at the benefits of gender in a diversified economy, when an economy has embraced gender also, there is increased creativity. Increased creativity in the sense that there is a broader perspective. There's a broader perspective of ideas of growing the economy, okay? There's also a wider pool of innovation, implying that this economy has active participants where there is no player that is downplayed. So the economy allocates deliberately resources to all sectors of the economy so that development is not haphazard, okay? There is also interdependency, okay? The word interdependency here implies that there is no specific gender that feels superior to the other. So when both genders are assured of their importance in a given community, in a given society, in a given government, this is enough motivation, enough jumpstart for both genders to depend on each other and to place a lot of value on the input that comes with each gender. So there is no idle gender, there is no gender that is oppressed. There is a wide range of skills. There's an increased pool of human resource capital. Okay, so maybe I also need to mention there that when we look at increased human capital, we imply that, let's say, for instance, in the nursing, in the health sector, where the profession was shunned by the male gender, when there is no stereotyping associated with professions, you find that a lot of the male gender will also seek and see interest and need to be found in the health profession and be nurses. The same goes for engineering, a course which was biased toward one gender will find a lot of entrants from the vulnerable oppressed gender just to increase the balance and also promote economic development. In 2016, though, need be mentioned that the Zambian population stood at somewhere around 12 million. So in those statistics, the majority of the gender is female, and this is the gender that was vulnerable in the sense that, according to the education sector, when a girl fell pregnant, they were required to drop out of school. Now, with a background given, with a re-entry policy, it entails that this particular girl has a second chance at life, okay? So they will complete school and move on to tertiary education and add on to the workforce human capital that will increase productivity. So in increasing productivity, what are we looking at basically? In increasing productivity, we are looking at more and more economic activities that will contribute to the development of a given nation. It means that we are looking at an economy that has a lot of its citizens are elite, educated, have basic education, and have access to basic needs. I move on, still under the benefits that come with embracing gender in a diversified economy. clearly there is a reduced imbalance between the gender. So in looking at equity and equality, in this presentation, I want to mention that since the women, according to statistics in my country, are more than the male, more preference for school places, jobs, and many other sectors of the economy do not use the 50-50% approach. Rather, they use the approach where the larger the number for the population, the larger the location. Okay, so it means that there is reduced or clearly blurry gap in dealing with the females and the males in our society. Okay, I move on. The other point there is thinking big. Thinking big basically is a broadened scope for the full functionality of all the genders. Okay, so people are made, the vulnerable gender is made to believe in themselves. There's a broadened scope on what they are capable to bring on board, what they are capable to do, and to also explore the potential of the vulnerable gender. Lastly, there on that slide, I look at policies. So when I look at policies in this presentation, Zambia, for instance, is a signatory to so many international global charters that promote gender equality. So it means that in a given state, there is a deliberate support to multiple sectors of the economy. There is a deliberate policy to promote or raise the downtrodden gender. There is deliberate allocation of resources to all the sectors that will make sure they embrace all the oppressed. Okay, there is a deliberate support to multiple sectors not to actually oppress or stereotype professions. So by policies, I imply that this economy will blossom not because things are done haphazardly, but because there are policies that governments are meant to follow. Okay. Now, moving forward, I also want to look at the importance of a diversified economy. Okay, so complementarity, it is there, means that each gender has a role to play. Each gender has a role to play. So meaning that where there is need that this has to be done by this particular gender and this has to be done by the other gender, it means that in performance, the role of each is complementary. There is no competition. There is no outdoing of each other or trying to win or maybe show superiority over one and another. The second one there of the 4 points in that slide looks at equity. I have also endeavored to look at equity in the other slides. Equity will entail fair allocation of resources according to needs of a particular gender. So this obviously, like I mentioned, will use ratio in resource allocation based on numbers. So the more the need, the more the allocation. Equality, so equality there means that there is equal opportunity in development. So if there is going to be a particular job advertised, the criteria will not be based on gender, but the criteria will be based on the ability to perform, on the qualification to hold a particular job, and on the speciality that the particular human resource has. Basically, by equality, we imply that there is no stereotyping. For instance, in education, there will be opportunity given to each one as long as they have scored or they qualify, and there will be opportunity for each gender to be given a chance to have access to education. Decision making there, like I earlier mentioned, more and more gender that is oppressed or stereotyped is brought on board to be appointed in decision-making positions and appointments. When I talk about appointments here, basically in the Zambian context, we have endeavored to increase appointments in parliament and ministerial appointments toward the vulnerable gender, which in this case I have qualified according to the Zambian scenario, being the female, which are the girls and the women. Of course, under career progression there, it means that chances are given equally. So each gender is allowed to progress as long as they are qualified for the career they are vying for. Finally, to summarize the importance there, I look at economic development, because according to this presentation, gender, embracing gender should boil down to economic development. So gender equality and equity enhances the development of an economy, as well as provides equal resource allocation to improve the quality of life. When we look at the quality of life, there are things there that can be mentioned, like access to clean water, access to good health, access to education, access to land by anyone. And so when all those things are fairly and objectively handled in this particular economy, we see that there will be improved quality of life. As I conclude this presentation, I have summarized my presentation using 3 points. The first one being, there is a deliberate inclusiveness for economic development. This means that this particular government that embraces gender has a vision of improving the economy. And so because of that, they have a mandate to conform to policies and strategies